The story of 1989 in Eastern Europe is one of transformation, the year when communist regimes that had ruled for 4 decades collapsed in rapid succession. Poland negotiated its way to democracy through months of careful compromise. Hungary opened its borders after years of gradual reform. Czechoslovakia experienced its Velvet Revolution through massive peaceful protests. Yet the moment that defined the year, the image that symbolized the end of the Cold War, came on a single November night in Berlin when a wall that had divided a city for 28 years opened by accident. No one planned for the Berlin Wall to fall on November 9, 1989. No revolutionary leader called for its destruction that night. No government decided to tear it down. Instead, a confused press conference, a bureaucrat shuffling through notes he did not fully understand, a mistaken announcement broadcast on live television, and thousands of East Berliners who decided to test whether the impossible had become possible combined to produce one of history's most dramatic moments. By midnight, people were dancing on the wall. By morning, the Cold War's most powerful symbol was being demolished by ordinary citizens with hammers and chisels. The Berlin Wall had stood since August 1961, a concrete barrier cutting through the heart of a city, dividing families, imprisoning a population, and representing the Iron Curtain's physical manifestation. It appeared permanent, a fact of life that shaped how millions lived. Then, in a single night, through a series of accidents and miscalculations, it opened. What followed was celebration, reunification, and the transformation of Europe. The Berlin Wall was built in August 1961 to stop the hemorrhaging of East Germany's population to the west. Since World War II, Berlin remained divided into 4 occupation zones. The 3 western zones merged into West Berlin, a democratic enclave inside communist East Germany. The Soviet zone became the capital of the German Democratic Republic. This created an anomaly. While the inner German border was heavily fortified, Berlin remained porous. East Germans could take the subway to West Berlin and from there travel west. Between 1949 and 1961, approximately 2.7 million East Germans fled through Berlin, draining the country of skilled workers and young people. On August 13, 1961, East German authorities began erecting barriers. What started as barbed wire evolved into an elaborate system of walls, guard towers, minefields, and kill zones. The wall eventually stretched 96 miles around West Berlin. The government called it the Anti-Fascist Protection Rampart. Everyone understood it was a prison wall. The wall separated families overnight. People who had crossed freely found themselves cut off. Some never saw family members again. Berlin became 2 cities with increasingly divergent experiences. At least 140 people died attempting to cross, shot by border guards or killed by mines. East Germany presented itself as a socialist success story, the most prosperous state in the communist bloc. Compared to Poland or Romania, East Germans enjoyed higher living standards and more consumer goods. The government provided guaranteed employment, subsidized housing, and comprehensive social services. Yet this relative prosperity could not hide fundamental problems. The economy, organized through centralized planning, was inefficient and inflexible. Innovation stagnated. Consumer goods were shoddy. Political freedom did not exist. The Socialist Unity Party controlled all aspects of life. The Stasi, the secret police, conducted surveillance on an unprecedented scale. An estimated 1 in every 63 East Germans worked as an informant. The organization compiled detailed files on millions of citizens, creating an atmosphere of distrust where people censored themselves constantly. Despite repression, East Germans remained aware of life in West Germany through television. Most could receive West German broadcasts, providing a window into a vastly different society. They watched West German shows and compared their lives to those of Germans across the border, who enjoyed freedom, prosperity, and opportunities unavailable in the East. This constant comparison undermined the government's attempts to generate genuine loyalty. The wall stood for 28 years, a permanent fixture that seemed immovable. Children grew up knowing nothing else. The division appeared permanent. Yet beneath this stability, contradictions accumulated that would make the system unsustainable when external pressures increased. Mikhail Gorbachev's rise to power in the Soviet Union in 1985 began changing the fundamental equation that had sustained East European communism. His policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, aimed to revitalize Soviet communism, but instead revealed its fundamental weaknesses. When restrictions on speech relaxed, criticism exploded. Critically for Eastern Europe, Gorbachev made clear the Soviet Union would no longer use military force to maintain communist governments in satellite states. This represented revolutionary change. Since 1945, Soviet tanks had enforced communist rule in Eastern Europe. Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968. Soviet military power crushed reform movements. The Brezhnev Doctrine asserted the Soviet right to intervene anywhere socialism was threatened. East European communist leaders understood their power rested on Soviet willingness to use force. Gorbachev rejected this approach. His spokesman joked about the Sinatra Doctrine. Each country could do it their way. This became clear through Soviet inaction, as Poland negotiated with solidarity and Hungary opened its borders. Hungary's decision in May 1989 to dismantle its border fence with Austria created immediate crisis for East Germany. East Germans began traveling to Hungary, then crossing into Austria and West Germany. By summer, thousands were fleeing. Others sought refuge in West German embassies in Prague and Warsaw. The East German government, led by Erich Honecker, refused reform. While Poland negotiated, while Hungary opened borders, East Germany remained frozen in orthodoxy. Honecker dismissed Gorbachev's reforms as dangerous deviation. This rigidity became untenable as the exodus accelerated. On October 7, 1989, Gorbachev visited East Berlin for East Germany's 40th anniversary. His presence highlighted the contrast between Soviet reform and East German stagnation. Gorbachev reportedly told Honecker that life punishes those who come too late. Demonstrators chanted, "Gorby, help us," while security forces beat protesters. By early October, protests erupted in Leipzig. Demonstrations began with prayer meetings at Nikolaikirche, where Pastor Christian Führer had been holding Monday evening prayers for peace since 1982. After services, people gathered outside calling for reform. What started with hundreds grew rapidly. By late September, thousands participated. On October 2nd, 10,000 marched. On October 9th, the crowd reached 70,000. The protesters chanted, "We are the people." The phrase was significant. The government claimed to rule in the people's name. The protesters asserted they were the people and rejected the government's authority. They demanded freedom of speech, assembly, travel, and democratic reforms. The government considered using force on October 9th. Security units were mobilized. Hospitals prepared for casualties. But local officials, recognizing violence would intensify the crisis, refrained from attacking. The march proceeded peacefully. The restraint emboldened protesters across East Germany. The demonstrations continued and grew. By early November, protests in East Berlin drew hundreds of thousands. On November 4th, perhaps 1 million gathered in Alexanderplatz demanding democracy. The government was losing control. On October 18th, the Politburo forced Honecker to resign. Egon Krenz replaced him, promising reform, but few believed him. The protests continued. The exodus continued. East Germany was disintegrating. On November 9th, the Politburo met to discuss new travel regulations intended to reduce pressure by allowing East Germans to travel to West Germany through official channels with proper authorization. The idea was to maintain control while appearing responsive to demands for freedom of movement. East Germans would be able to apply for travel permits which could be granted or denied based on criteria that remained deliberately vague. The regulations were supposed to take effect the following day, November 10th, after coordination with border guards and preparation of documentation procedures. Günter Schabowski, a Politburo member responsible for media relations, attended part of the meeting but left early to prepare for his regular press conference, with international journalists scheduled for 6 in the evening. As he departed, he was handed a note about the travel regulation changes, but had not participated in the detailed discussions about implementation procedures or timing. At the press conference, Schabowski announced various routine matters. Near the end, Riccardo Ehrman, an Italian journalist, asked about the new travel regulations he had heard mentioned. Schabowski, pulling out his notes, read somewhat haltingly that East Germans would be able to travel to West Germany. Ehrman pressed for details, asking specifically when this would take effect. Schabowski shuffled through papers, clearly uncertain and searching for information. After a pause, he said, "As far as I know, effective immediately, without delay." This statement, broadcast live on East and West German television, created instant confusion and excitement. The regulations were supposed to take effect the next day and required applications for permission with government review. But Schabowski, confused about the details and pressed for specifics, had just announced immediate effect with no qualifications. East Germans watching television heard that they could travel to the West immediately. West German media immediately amplified the announcement, describing it as the opening of the wall. By 8 in the evening, people began gathering at border crossings, demanding to be let through to West Berlin. Guards, receiving no clear instructions and watching crowds grow larger and more insistent, faced an impossible situation. Their standing orders said borders were closed, except for authorized crossings with proper documentation. But the Politburo spokesman had just announced on television that travel was now permitted immediately. Calls to superiors seeking guidance produced vague and contradictory responses. No one wanted to take responsibility for ordering guards to shoot or forcibly prevent crossings, given the televised announcement.
From the Berlin Wall specifically, take a look at them. They've been there since last night. They are here in the thousands. They are here in the tens of thousands.
But no one explicitly authorized opening the border either. At Bornholmer Strasse crossing in northern Berlin, Lieutenant Colonel Harald Jäger commanded the guards facing thousands of increasingly vocal East Berliners. The crowd chanted, "Open the gate." Jäger called his superiors repeatedly seeking orders. The responses ranged from wait to see what happens to use your judgment to maintain order. By 10:30, the crowd had become unmanageable, pressing against the barriers, and Jäger recognized that attempting to hold the crossing by force would produce violence that would be broadcast worldwide. Lacking clear orders and facing a situation spiraling beyond control, he made a decision. He ordered the gates opened, telling his guards to stamp everyone's documents with a special mark that would theoretically prevent their return. Though he knew this was meaningless. The crowd surged through Bornholmer Strasse. Within minutes, word spread across East Berlin. People rushed to other crossing points. Guards at these locations, seeing what had happened at Bornholmer Strasse and facing similar crowds, followed the same logic. By 11:30, Crossings across Berlin were opening. By midnight, tens of thousands of East Berliners were pouring into West Berlin. What followed was unprecedented celebration. East Berliners poured into West Berlin. West Berliners rushed to welcome them. Strangers embraced. People wept. West Berliners distributed flowers and champagne. Young people climbed onto the wall at the Brandenburg Gate, dancing, singing, spraying champagne. The wall, which had meant death, became a platform for celebration. Others attacked it with hammers and chisels. Each piece was a trophy, a souvenir of the night the impossible happened. The celebration continued for days. Images broadcast worldwide of people dancing on the wall, of families reuniting, of Germans celebrating together became defining moments of 1989 and the Cold War's end. West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl rushed to Berlin from Poland. He appeared at the West Berlin City Hall before massive crowds and spoke of this historic moment. The East German government could not restore control. Over following weeks, border crossings became increasingly informal. People crossed freely. Sections of the wall were demolished. Other sections became art or souvenirs. The opening of the wall made German reunification inevitable, though the process and timeline remained uncertain in the immediate aftermath.
The wall that the East Germans put up in 1961 to keep its people in will now be breached by anybody who wants to leave.
Many West German politicians initially spoke of gradual convergence over years, perhaps decades. The assumption was that East Germany would continue to exist as a reformed democratic state that would eventually merge with West Germany through extended negotiation. This proved unrealistic. Once the wall opened, the exodus of East Germans to the West accelerated dramatically. Why remain in East Germany with its dysfunctional economy when you could move to West Germany with its prosperity and opportunities? By early 1990, thousands were leaving daily, draining East Germany of its most productive workers and skilled professionals. The East German economy, never particularly strong, collapsed as workers departed and the old communist management systems disintegrated without the repression that had sustained them. Elections in East Germany in March 1990 produced a clear mandate for rapid reunification. The Alliance for Germany, which explicitly called for quick unification, won decisively. This reflected East German desire to join the successful West German system rather than attempt to build something new from the discredited East German state. Economic reunification occurred on July 1, 1990, when the West German Deutsche Mark replaced the East German currency. This created immediate hardship as East German industries, unable to compete with West German firms or find markets for their inferior products, collapsed almost overnight. Unemployment in former East Germany soared. Entire industries shut down. The transition from planned economy to market system produced dislocations that would persist for decades. Political reunification followed on October 3, 1990, less than a year after the wall fell. The German Democratic Republic ceased to exist. Its territory became 5 states within the Federal Republic. This absorption, rather than merger, reflected the reality that West Germany was absorbing a failed state rather than two equals coming together. The process proved difficult. Economic integration was far more challenging than political integration. Environmental damage from decades of communist mismanagement required massive cleanup. The Stasi files, open to allow East Germans to see their own records, revealed the extent of surveillance and betrayal, destroying relationships and trust. The psychological adjustment from dictatorship to democracy, from guaranteed employment to competition, created social tensions that remained unresolved years later. Yet reunification occurred peacefully, through negotiation and democratic process rather than violence or war. This represented a remarkable achievement given Germany's 20th century history. The wall's fall, accidental and unplanned, led within a year to the peaceful reunification of a nation divided for 4 decades. The fall of the Berlin Wall represented far more than the end of a divided city. It symbolized the failure of communist dictatorship and the end of the Cold War division of Europe. The wall had stood as the most visible manifestation of the Iron Curtain. Its fall demonstrated that even the most entrenched authoritarian systems collapse when they lose legitimacy and their supporters lose the will to maintain them through force.
And people, knowing they could travel, didn't quite rush to the borders as they have been doing in Germany.
The wall fell because multiple factors converged in 1989. Gorbachev's reforms undermined the ideological foundation of East European communism and removed the Soviet military guarantee that had sustained these regimes for decades. Economic stagnation made the promise of socialist prosperity increasingly hollow when East Germans could watch West German television and see the vast gap in living standards. Access to Western television prevented the government from controlling information or maintaining the illusion that life in the East was comparable to the West. And the courage of ordinary East Germans who protested in Leipzig and other cities despite real risks demonstrated that populations would no longer accept dictatorship passively. The events of November 9th showed how quickly seemingly permanent structures can collapse when their foundations erode. The wall had stood for 28 years. It appeared to be a permanent feature of European geography, as fixed as borders between nations. Then, through a combination of miscommunication, popular pressure, governmental paralysis, and the courage of people willing to test whether the impossible had become possible, it opened in a single night. No one planned this. It emerged from circumstances spiraling beyond any individual's or institution's control. For Germany, the wall's fall led to reunification and the emergence of Europe's largest and most powerful nation. The Federal Republic that absorbed East Germany became the economic engine of Europe, though the costs of reunification weighed on the German economy for years. For Eastern Europe, the wall's fall accelerated the collapse of communist regimes that would tumble across the region within weeks. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, and Romania all saw their communist governments fall by the end of 1989. For the world, it marked the symbolic end of the Cold War's bipolar division that had defined international relations for 4 decades. The celebrations of November 1989 captured something essential about human desire for freedom. People had risked everything to cross that wall for 28 years. They were shot attempting escape. Families were divided for decades. Lives were constrained and monitored by an oppressive state. Yet when the barrier finally fell, the joy was immediate, universal, and overwhelming. The images of Germans from East and West celebrating together, of people dancing on the wall that had imprisoned them, of families reuniting after decades of separation, remain powerful reminders that the human desire for freedom and connection ultimately proves stronger than walls, ideologies, or systems designed to suppress it. The Berlin Wall's fall teaches that authoritarian systems, however entrenched they appear, remain vulnerable when they lose legitimacy and the will to use force. It demonstrates that change, when it comes, can arrive with stunning speed, transforming landscapes that seemed permanent. And it shows that historical moments often emerge not from careful planning, but from accidents, mistakes, and the courage of ordinary people who decide to test whether the impossible might, after all, be possible.